Welcome to the Associated Church Press podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder. This is a space where professionals in Christian media share real stories, successes, challenges, and lessons learned so we can connect, collaborate, and grow together in today's changing media landscape. Welcome. I am so excited today to have Alexander Carpenter in the studio to talk about Spectrum magazine, where he has been the executive editor for about 4 years. So welcome to the program, Alexander.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to know a little bit more about Spectrum magazine and sort of who you are and what as a magazine, as a news outlet, and the Seventh-day Adventist, of which the Spectrum reports. So give us the highlights here.
Sure. I'll try to be brief, but it's a long history. Spectrum was started in 1969 by kind of that classic group of people who grew up within a faith tradition, the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. And they were kind of multi-generational members and were all going off to graduate schools in the 1960s and having conversations about things they hadn't maybe been taught back in Sabbath school, is what we call it as Seventh-day Adventists, or from their teachers in Adventist educational institutions. And so we're asking questions about those things, faith, and actually thinking about, okay, how does what I'm learning really impact what I believe or believed? And so in that tension of believe and believed is where Spectrum sort of exists. And it was a journal, a quarterly journal for the first about 30 years. And then it became also a website in that natural progression. And now I'm as an executive director and editor-in-chief, I'm in that tension of figuring out how do I handle both a quarterly journal, which is we still print and send to our beloved supporters, and also exist online and obviously put out much of our product for free and think about how we grow online and attract people and make an impact.
And that's a lot of mouths to feed. So it sounds like it started off maybe kind of think pieces about when you talk about the intersection between believed and believe, that's sort of, and that's the early 70s, such a sort of fecund time for that reanalysis and kind of reframing. How does that, translate now? I mean, over the course of 30 or 40 years, gosh, the 70s were like
50,
50 years
yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
Feeling a little old now, but how does that translate when the world has become sort of snappier and shorter, and maybe you're bringing a little bit more journalistic impetus in, as opposed to those that intersection of shifting belief?
Yeah. So it really started out as a scholarly journal, independent, and we remain independent, nonprofit. It shifted pretty quickly, though, and was shocking back in the 70s because there was an issue called women in the early 70s. And in that, they actually did sort of the first piece of journalism. It was done by a pastor who then went off and went to Columbia Journalism School and then actually went to Penn and became an attorney. So Tom Dibdall's sort of kind of legendary in this way, and he's still around. But he did a piece on a woman who was working for the denominational press and realized that she was getting paid much less than half of what her male colleagues were doing. And so she labored with the denominational leaders about this. They did not budge. In fact, she has this great sentence where she felt like they had cement in their heads. They were just not going to adjust. And then she ended up suing the denomination, and that case is now cited over 450 times in American law because she was a real pioneer, Mary Kay MacLeod Silver. So That is kind of our journalistic heritage. And now I have moved the team in the last 4 years. I have about a 20-person part-time staff, almost all younger than me. And we decided that we would try to put out a news article every single week. And
Mm.
so that really, we call it News of the Week. We aim to get it up each Thursday. And those are, somewhere between 1,500 to 6,000 word investigative pieces. And that really drives the energy. It catches people's attention, and that gets translated into all of our social media channels.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where we're at in terms of that. We still put out scholarly pieces on the website and in the journal. But really, I'm focused on how we can, because when you look at what the landscape is in terms of our world, people want to know what is happening.
Hmm.
And I feel like even beyond ideology, it helps us reach a wider audience. And that's kind of the kind of magic sauce that I'm trying to, stir up here.
Sure. Well, and I want to get into sort of how investigative pieces are received. If you're churning out one a week in long form, that's a significant effort. But before we do that, I want to understand how you came to this work because you have really deep roots in the Adventist tradition. And so as a young Alexander, did you always dream of working at Spectrum Magazine, or was your path a little bit more divergent?
Yeah, I didn't. Um I'm a fifth generation Adventist on both sides of my family, and that
Wow.
wasn't something that my mom and dad instilled in me at all because they were just, they were healthcare workers essentially,
Hmm.
for most of their career. But when I realized that, I think that helped gave me a sense of my identity. Because of course I was a rebellious teenager and thought, what do these ideas that I grew up with have to do with reality? But once I realized that, I was sort of interested in understanding more about the faith that I was born into. And so I studied religion and English literature at an Adventist university, Andrews, in Berrien Springs, Michigan, in the
Hmm.
southwestern corner, just not far from Notre Dame. So it was great to go
That's not
across
too
the
far.
border and hang out there, and see what the Catholics were up to, which was
Hmm.
really fun because Adventists have this really interesting um, history with Catholics in our own theology. So that tension, growing up and thinking through what it meant to be a member of my denomination, I think raised a lot of questions. And I was at a conference on ethics as an undergrad, and a guy walked in to do a presentation, and my one of my professors nudged me and said, "Watch out for him. He's a maverick." And of
Mm,
course, I paid more attention to him,
exactly. That's like
and
catnip.
he was the then editor of Spectrum, and he had gone to Harvard for his PhD, and he was talking about Adventists have had a real focus on health since the
Hmm.
19th century, our founding around 1844, and then we became a denomination in 1863. And he was saying, we have this belief about not smoking. Why don't we translate this into a social value and
Mm,
support legislation to prohibit tobacco companies from advertising to children? And
hmm.
I just realized what these things that were individual could be social. And that really got me interested. So I went to the seminary as an undergrad to hang out in their library where the Spectrum Journal was at the time. And that's kind of how I got connected to it. I was reading it, and then later on, I wrote for it. And then I, when I was in grad school, at UC Berkeley in the Graduate Theological Union. I was there in the early days of blogging, and so I proposed to the editor of Spectrum then, Bonnie Dwyer, that we start a blog, and that was more than 20 years ago. And so I ran that blog for about a decade.
Hmm.
And then I was on the board, and then they asked me to lead the organization a little more than 4 years ago.
Wow, and that seems like such a linear progression, but I'm interested that sort of aha moment where, like, belief becomes action, and so I wanted for those who aren't particularly familiar with the Adventist tradition, you know, the centering on health and the body as a temple, that's a very clear call to action that I could see kind of rippling out into the world. But what other values kind of connect in for you into that maybe social justice aspect that's important to you or values that you wanna translate to action?
Um, I would say we just did a strategic plan for the next 5 years, so we're
Love that.
definitely thinking about our values. Um, our we focus on creating community. That's an
Mhm,
important value for us. We focus on really understanding how to take our beliefs and converting them into some sort of action. And another value that's really important to us is the Seventh-day Adventist denomination really exploded in terms of membership in the last 50 years or so. So there's 23 million around the world. And now, most of even though Adventism really started in the northeastern part of the United States, there's about a million in the US and Canada, and there are almost 12 million in the continent of Africa,
wow, yes.
and there's a million in Brazil. So I have tried to bring voices and members of my staff in that represent the sort of global
Mhm,
reach of Adventism and how it's rooted, and it's and trying to, beyond the denomination, just think about how, you know, we have to we have to work with what we have, and what,
mhm.
I was born into was an opportunity to think about what it means to be on this planet. And we have these connections that, v- when you grow up within a system, you have an opportunity to think about how that system operates within the larger issues that are part of our globe. So that's kind of what makes me get out of bed every day, is thinking and trying to find those voices that I can magnify in a way that helps other Adventists maybe connect with a social issue
Mhm,
and have a heart for it that they wouldn't normally, because they would just maybe dismiss it because it's just another part of the world. But now it's a fellow faith member, and they're suffering in Cuba right now or in the Middle East, and maybe that will help them sort of realize that that they're connected, um, and take it seriously as a member of the human family.
so it feels like you're, taking that value of community and telling the stories of those within in the faith to kind of not to a closed loop, but to have it feedback and say, "Oh, this is important. This is how these values kind of translate across cultures that may on at heart seem very dissimilar, but
Yeah.
are united by faith." Am I
Yeah.
getting that right?
Yeah, exactly. One example is when the US government cut off a lot of their USAID funding.
Mhm,
We went out and did stories on how our hospitals in um, Uganda and in Kenya were directly affected and people would be suffering. And I interviewed the executives and doctors at those hospitals, who then could make it very clear to Adventists in the U.S. voters how their choices were, or maybe not their choices, but our government's choices were affecting people who were trying to do good work. And we really care about humanitarian um, service around the world. And now we would be basically, our own institutions would be suffering, and maybe that would help people realize that, we might want to rethink how our money was being used by our government.
Well, and I wanna so many avenues that we can go down, but I wanted to check in, when you think about, and this is not unusual for other denominations and other faith traditions where sort of where it started or where most of the power is located in the US, but there's a lot more. Like you had said, there's, a million in the US and Canada, but 12 million Adventists in the continent of Africa. And that power dynamic. So I'm interested in like how, and I know you're fighting the good fight to create relevance for that kind of power elite, I guess is a good way to put it, in the US and in North America. Um, but how is that going? Or do you feel like that there is a power imbalance, or what do you think about that dichotomy?
Yeah. We do what we call our general conference session, where the head of the denomination is elected every 5 years.
Hmm.
And we just finished that in 2025, our last one. And there was a power shift for the first time. Well, there's some, there's going to be an Adventist. There's a couple of times where someone was born outside the U.S., maybe 100 years ago, and became the president, but really wasn't Americanized. And it was somebody who had been born in Europe.
Hmm.
Our new president is from Brazil.
Mm,
And so already you see that awareness of our global identity shifting in people's minds. They're really, it's no longer a guy that they went to school with here in the US. It's
sure.
somebody who isn't as familiar, who speaks with an accent. And just because of the cultural mores, has a different perspective, and it's going to be interesting to see how that affects us. Getting back to your question, though, I think one of the things that we really are trying to do um, as an organization is help the organization think about itself. We're kind of there as a mirror. And that's why I really care about journalism. Is I think one of the best ways to kind of um, create self-awareness is to hold up that mirror and create. There's a quote from a great film, The Blood of the Poet, from the 1920s, that says mirrors should reflect a little bit more before sending back images.
Mm,
And that's what I try to do with our work, is to really help the folks who are making decisions um, around our institutions reflect a little bit more, pause, and not just kind of go sometimes only with their gut, which I obviously have to do sometimes in my role, but also to really think about the larger um, ways that the church is embedded into the fabric of the human story, and not just react in terms of a kind of self-preservation, but
hmm.
also think about what it means to really serve the rest of humanity, that we're sort of a part of. And Adventists have, because it's sort of a weird religion that grew up, it's in the kind of new American religion category at the American Academy of Religion. Um, People sometimes confuse us with Mormons or
Mm,
Jehovah's Witnesses. And And so there's and we're not as well known as either of those entities
Mhm.
in a lot of for a lot of, speaking generally. So one of the things that I also want to do is kind of pull Adventism out of that corner and help it realize that, there are three presidents of countries that have connections to Adventism, either
I had
are
no idea.
members, yeah,
Mhm.
but they're not, in the US. It's in Africa or in the Caribbean, and so helping the and Papua New Guinea.
Mhm.
So really helping the Adventist church realize that it can't just be the sort of sectarian experience, that it's embedded in the world, and there's a kind of political and social environmental commitment that we need to make. It's not just about being sort of a holy people unto our own.
Mhm. Well, and it sounds like a lot of the work that it comes into, like, creating context, so, like, contextualizing your tradition amongst, and I guess sort of the average person, especially in the US, and Canada, where Associated Church Press focuses our efforts, more and more people are becoming more spiritual, but more
Mm,
unchurched, and so,
yeah.
like, helping people understand how you're different from the Jehovah's Witness, how you're different from Mormons. Um, you know, do you do like a primer? How do you do that? Like, what are those differentiators? And earlier you had talked about your kind of complicated, maybe not personally complicated experience with the Catholic faith, but the Adventists sort of enmeshment. So like, how do you, aside from, and you want your work, I think, to be about education and putting in context, but you also wanna make sure that you're centered on who you are. So how does that play out in the work that you do? Is that sort of the silent witness? Are you doing explainers, or how does that work?
Mm. Well, we do media essentially. So we y- pa- I'll kind of back my way into that really great question. So Spectrum has for a long time, put out articles that push the denomination in new directions. Um, on its understanding of science, on its understanding of how we treat women. We've had a large fight in the denomination over women's ordination,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
there are um, entities that now ordain women. We have a very we mirror the Catholic Church in the layers of bureaucracy that we have.
Okay.
Um, so you have a
Great.
local church, then you have a conference, then you have a union, and then you have a division, and then you have the general conference. So there's 5 layers there. Um, and so what the church is really wrestling with right now is how a local church feels like they would love to have a ordained woman as a pastor. The Is the conference okay with that? Some are, some aren't. Then
Mhm.
so it goes up, and often we've wrestled with these issues just at that general conference level. And so we look to our Anglican Episcopalian friends for some instruction on and guidance and a sense of where Christianity is going in terms of the way that they allow differences to exist within sort of a common umbrella. Although, of course, there's lots of tensions in every denomination. We see that with the Methodists as well. So
Mhm.
there's in some ways we're sort of the younger kid at the table, the sibling at the table, kind of sort of seeing what our fellow Christians have done over centuries, and how they've wrestled with the changes that come with maturation, and also how we wrestle with secularization
Mhm.
and how we try to remain relevant in the culture. So that's the big picture. What I try to do is think about how we can use the tools of media to kind of think about how a denomination should have a conversation about these things. And so um, we are very active on social media. In 2025, we had 15 million views across our online platforms.
That's huge.
And that was really driven by our use of Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And um, it's really been interesting to see how a small little nonprofit like ours can use social media to sort of magnify the voices that are calling for change or calling for reflection. Um and the probably the way that we do that the most is I just try to find people who are saying thoughtful, interesting things about our faith and the rest of the world, and and then try to and then build an infrastructure to magnify those voices. So for a long time, Spectrum was sort of like the magazine that people would have out on their
The
table,
show
and when they
magazine
had yeah, they'd
with the unbroken
bring
spine.
yeah, and they'd bring people home from church for a nice little dinner after church, and you would know, okay, this is a safe home. They read Spectrum, or oh no, they read Spectrum. Okay, interesting.
Oh,
It
interesting.
had that
Okay.
sort of cultural signifier. Um, and and even still, I find people are, if they do we do requests for comment all the times with denominational leaders, institutional leaders, scholars, and there can be at times okay, Spectrum's calling, oh no, because they know that we are asking the hard questions that people don't really talk about in public, and that's kind of what the reputation is. And so I find that really um what I want to do is take it from that, okay, it's in the home kind of, nobody, you have to like, oh, are you cool with Spectrum? I'm cool we like read it, okay, we now, and there's a real connection for people who have, I've got donors who have given, they have every issue of the journal
Oh,
dating back to
wow.
1969. So they love it, they cherish it. What I'm trying to do is really expand that through online media, so that
Mhm.
it's not just this thing that if you could pay for it, you'd get. Now, Spectrum is out there telling stories that are, I believe, important, and hopefully will pull in new generations of people who kind of come for the news and then stick around for the views, as we say.
Oh, I love that. And so I wanted to now talk about sort of the role of that independent journalism that's examining this faith, because there's always tension. Like when you think about where the money comes, is you're being supported. I'm assuming supported by the general conference, but you're
We have no
reporting on them too.
Yeah, no, we have no denominational support. We are
Oh, none at all.
completely
Okay.
independent, totally independent. Yeah, we are, people send in their subscription checks, and that's our lifeblood. And then I have the joy of writing for grants and writing both the proposals and the reports. So we're kind of 50-50, just individual donor support, and then some granting organizations give us support as well. So that's how it works. So we can say whatever we want. There's a really clear board value in that. And that allows us a lot of freedom to say what we want to say. But of course, there's always, as any journalist knows, you're thinking about access, you're doing research, you're
Hmm.
building connections. So that's
And
when
you're
I
doing
talk
those
to them.
and those long investigative pieces every week. So
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about sort of that investigative mindset. You've always had this reputation of asking the hard questions, but it's a lot different than having investigative pieces every quarter and investigative pieces every week. So, how are you, like, logically doing that? Like, just, being able capacity-wise to do that, and then how is that being received? I mean, it sounds like a busy 4 years.
Yeah, it has been. Um, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I've got about a team of about 20 part-time staff, and so it I've divided the team up into departments, and so every Monday we have the news team department meeting, and we look at where we are on a variety of stories. And we have an internship program that I started 4 years ago. We went from one intern to four to seven,
Oh, wow.
and um, and that's been a source for us. Also, some of our interns. There's a really nice period of time where someone graduates from college. Maybe they've moved back in with their parents, but they're wanting to build their resume, and so I love working with them. I taught for a while at an Adventist college, and so I really try to use our internship as a skills building experience.
Mhm.
And they're doing real work. Like last summer, our interns wrote our AI policy, and they
Oh, great.
also investigated a Zimbabwean Adventist billionaire who is not allowed in the U.S. and many European countries for the way that he extracts resources from his country. But he
Okay.
also received an award from the denomination because he provides income for a lot of Adventist educators in Zimbabwe. So
Mm,
those are the kind of stories that we like to do. We're doing a story on the Adventist seminary in Cuba right now, and wrestling with the politics of that and the human disaster that's happening on the island.
mhm.
Um, so we're really thinking about those sort of big issues every single week. And, those stories take weeks, sometimes months to
Right.
do. Um, and so I just have those scheduled out, and I have the reporters working away, and I'm checking in with them to see where they're at. And then when something is sort of ready to be birthed into the world, then I have a copy editing team that goes through it and copy edits it. We do fact checking, um, clean up all the requests for comments that we need to do, and then get that out. And that it's exhausting work in a lot of ways
Mhm.
because we really committed to this. But when I looked at what the opportunities were for building our audience, to me, it seemed like news was really the way that we could pull people in and be an asset for folks who didn't, grow up reading the, print journal.
Mhm.
And our
So what kind
commitment is, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just interested in what kind of change you've seen. You've done, now a lot of, hundreds of investigative pieces. Have you seen what's been the effect of your reporting?
It's interesting. Well, it's people pay attention.
Mhm.
So our views have gone up. We had 4.95 million views in 2024. We had 2 million views in 2023. So our growth, we had 300% growth in terms of
That's
eyeballs
huge. Yeah.
last year. And so that is important. But, I don't, views online, what do they mean? I want those to turn into, of course, dollars coming into the organization. As an
Always the
executive
big struggle.
director, you
Yep.
have to think about that. I feel like it makes a good case statement to our donors, our current donors, but there's also tensions, and I think you're getting to that. It's an interesting question because it can be a little destabilizing because um, there's a love for the faith and
Hmm.
especially the institutions, and there's even an awareness that those institutions are fragile. So when we do a big investigative piece on a president of a university and how he's making cuts to beloved departments,
Hmm.
that can be a controversial article to publish because, you know, faith-based educational institutions in the US are facing a lot of headwinds and it's not easy. And so that administrator in some ways is just doing what every administrator has to do right now in that in a similar situation, which is, do we need 25 departments all separate? Do we need
Right.
to, be a good steward of our meager resources? But at the same time, is that person driven by some ideological um, blinders that is making those cuts perhaps not so just economically motivated, but are they driven by this person's perhaps desire to weed out problematic professors who
Hmm.
might have been talking too much about, the earth being uh, around longer than it seems in a traditional Adventist interpretation of the Bible. So, we have to, I have to navigate, and I'm always interested in our other ACP members. I love going to the conference for the ways that I hear other people kind of struggling with similar issues or succeeding on in what they do and learning from that. And that's one of the tensions that exist is when you're doing this kind of journalism, you're ruffling feathers, and sometimes the chickens have gone to to really stretch this metaphor have gone to the institution you're reporting about or are connected to that institution. So it's not just, okay, we ticked off a leader somewhere, but sometimes are we sort of, connected to the story in really kind of emotional ways. And so I
Hmm.
really I that's something that I'm really wrestling with, is how we can tell those stories without in a compassionate way that that doesn't assume the worst about an institution or a person just because they're making hard decisions. At the same time, I want to make sure that we're really, telling the truth about what's going on and not just giving a beleaguered institution or, a a a underfunded leader, you know, too much free reign.
So, how are you sitting with that tension? Because you have a lot of part times. You've got a lot of cats that you're herding. Um, how do you kind of translate those what are very nuanced ideas about this tension? And obviously, like your those are your sources as well.
Hmm.
Those individuals, and if like, are they going to talk to you again if you're hitting hard here? And so, how do you balance all that? And what do you tell your reporters? And I get that it's evolving and everyone's feeling their way through. But what's your sort of mindset on it now?
I we talk a lot about quality because trust is really the coin of the realm for
Hmm.
reporting. And so number one, we just have to get things right. So I've hired a lot of nerds. I'm a nerd. We just like to get the details right. And
Nerds unite, love it.
yeah, um, so that's really core for us. Um, and we did a piece on a new president of an institution this last summer, who was coming in. The past president had kind of been there a long time. There was actually a alumni group that broke away from like the official alumni association and
Mhm.
was calling for change at the top, basically get the president out.
Mhm.
And so we were reporting on that. I had the PR rep for that organization calling me up and yelling at me on the phone for our, for the he representing the university. So a new president came in, and felt like everything was going to be great, but that
Mhm.
president was really responding, I think, to the constituency and tightened controls on what students could wear on campus. And they could not be in the dorms during church hours. So they had to get out of, they were like kicked out of the dorms. So we did a report on that. And that president denounced us from
Ouch.
the pulpit the next Sabbath on Saturday, and called us the National Enquirer of Adventism.
Wow, that's bold, but, like, did you
I
frame
know,
that too?
of
I mean.
course. So the reporter that I had is actually a pastor's kid. He was up in, he called me from his dad's church office and was like, "Do you see this?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm watching this right now." So that reporter then did a rebuttal piece, still in college, actually, at a different school, and we put out a fact check on what the president was saying about us versus what we had actually written and what was in the handbook and the policy that was released. And we said, there was nothing that we said that was not true.
Mhm.
So those kind of things are really fun. I mean, I enjoy knowing that our work matters. We're not dropping it into a vacuum. We're dropping it into a an- a network of people who are very attuned to what we're trying to do and what we're saying, and um, it's kind of fun. I like that part of it. I like working with a bunch of people who are y- hungry to tell stories.
Mhm.
It's really amazing. So that's just an one anecdote of many that we're talking about what is actually going on and putting it out there in a very public way. And I think helping leaders realize that they can't just do things to appease one constituency, and they have to kind of consider the larger world and the larger um you know they can't just do things to students and get away with it, for
Right.
instance.
Well, and I think also, like, separating that rhetoric from because you have such an emphasis on accuracy and doing that research, all those pieces of, okay, let's cross-reference the handbook to this, to that, what's really happening. That, sort of dogged nerd-like consistency and commitment to accurate information really does help you say, okay, this is what we're really talking about. Someone can lambast us and call us a National Enquirer, but this is really what's happening, and letting
Hmm.
the work speak for itself. And
Yep.
that is, I mean, that seems like a very straightforward thing to emphasize with younger reporters as well. Like, everybody can get their hands around. This
Hmm.
is what our charge is. Um,
Yeah, I'll
so
just add to that on
please.
that. I want to hear your question here, but on that younger reporter, there's a lot of agita about how, well, okay, young people in church, you know, spiritual, not religious, all these things. th- th- I, one thing that I feel is really rewarding is that um, involving young folks who grow up in a church in this kind of thing gives them some sort of tie-in. In fact, I get, uh,
Right.
if when I call up someone, they will say like, "Wow, you've got a lot of young people like working with Spectrum." Like, and they may not like Spectrum. They're not happy to talk to me because we're doing a story on them, but I'll often get that comment. And I find that they are, it provides like journalism and the cultural writing that we do, the sort of, critique is a way for them to find a place within their faith tradition that is more comfortable for them
Hmm.
than sort of the normal denominational um, offerings.
Well, and that kind of goes back to something you said earlier about that intersection, or that the interstices between believed and believe. It certainly in that everyone is always, continuous revelation, in
Mhm.
many respects. But when you're in college, when you're in that younger period, it's all so changeable, and you're really figuring out what you think. And so, providing that framework where they can really delve into a topic or their own faith, and figure out what they think, and get some facts and perspective, I think is really, really important to
Yeah,
the long-term health of the denomination.
yeah, yeah. Hopefully.
Well, and so, when you look out over, there's a lot of denominational news outlets. There's a lot in this area. Are there publications or editors that you admire that you're like, gosh, I feel like they're really doing something that I want to bring to my own work?
Yeah, when I was in grad school, I had the opportunity of uh, helping host a speaker named Jim Wallace, who was,
Mm.
of course, associated with Sojourners. And so I had a chance to catch up with him, went to some conferences. So I appreciate what Sojourners does in
Mhm.
terms of reporting and sort of pastoring a community in many ways. Um, I, I mean, I mentioned it already, but I immediately joined ACP when I took on this role. Spectrum hadn't been a member before,
Mhm.
and I found the collegiality, the idea sharing of what's happening at ACP really helpful. Um, and I would, if I named one, I'd have to name all the
Right?
organs of ACP because each one, every time I go, I subscribe to I purposefully subscribe to um, many of our member publications. And I really find that there's a real, kind of iron sharpens iron kind of
Mhm.
experience there where, of course, we compete for awards, but we're also keep an eye. Oh, I like how they did that design, or I like how they framed that story. So I think it's essential to be. It helps rise out of that. There's when you're part of a denomination, there's a lot of insider speak and a lot
Right.
of you can be very familiar in there, but to push outside and be recognize the kind of Christian community that we're a part of, or the wider spiritual community that we're a part of, really, I think helps improve the way that we draw contrasts within my tradition. And, there's a lot of really great work out there that I think deserves attention. So we even sometimes will promote stories by ACP publications that we think deserve an audience within our own kind of readership.
Mhm. No, and I think, also that just underscores the fact that you're looking everywhere for ideas and for different perspectives to kind of bring that home to your own community. So, I know, you shared you've just done your 5-year strategic plan. What's next? What does Spectrum look like at the end of those 5 years in your world?
In To be very clear, double everything is
Love it.
essentially how
Okay.
I say it. So that means obviously revenue, readership, and I could go on and on, all the different sectors. But essentially, just looking at what the potential was, I brought together about 15 people who are not on my board and not mostly not on my staff. Um, and Were sort of professionals in their 20s to 40s as my strategic planning steering committee. And we met once a month for 6 months and had conversations around four major areas. And then that's how we drew up the plan. Um, the kind of essential part of it was to change our focus. The past mission statement, which we still reflect in our mission statement, was creating community through conversation, which is great.
Hmm.
But our new mission statement is focused on transforming information into impact. And what
That's
we're
so much
trying,
more vibrant and tying back into how you can translate your values into action. I love how you're doing
yeah.
that.
So we're a lot more outward facing as an organization. Um, it used to be a sort of, you read Spectrum, you would want to come to an annual conference and talk to other Spectrum readers and have a very civilized conversation. Um, this goes back to starting the blog decades ago, but we had open commenting, and that was really shocking within the denomination. Of course, there
Hmm.
were fora out there that people could use and talk about and debate, but there's just something about blogging that was fun, in 2005, 6, 7, 8, whatever. And that public facing critique and commentary, I mean, it doesn't rise often. Those comments, as anyone knows, don't rise to the standard you would love for the work that you're putting out there.
Right. Yeah.
But I've fought for that open commenting over and over and over again, because even if they're annoying or horrible, and we do, of course, try to weed out the bad apples, or that's kind of a weird, throw out the bad apples. That's a better metaphor. We do still think about our impact. And that's sort of, if people aren't talking about what you're doing, then you really have to think about if people are paying attention. And
Hmm.
I don't mean that broadly, but to me, it's important for us to realize that um, that conversation, even if it again isn't the sort of high-minded academic discourse that we all love, or a sort of genteel experience, is still real,
Hmm.
and it is it and when people see that you're willing to allow comments on your articles across now. I mean, we're getting like 1,000 comment. We had 3 stories in January that had 1,000 comments on
Oh
them.
my gosh. Are you moderating all those comments and replying, or because
No, no,
that's an
no,
effort. Okay. So
no,
you're
no, not
creating
at all.
this is framework work. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we do pay attention to them. I have staff who do, but um, yeah, we're not replying to them. We will, if there's bad people, we kick them off. We have policies,
Hmm.
you have to, topic policies, or replying too much policies, all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think that it's really important for us to recognize that we have to, as I'm thinking about the model of what we do, what do our supporters want?
Hmm.
And as I'm thinking about the future, the you know th- sometimes I'll get critique, which is, I'm familiar with the journal, but I'm seeing these articles, these
Hmm.
things that you're putting out there that are um you know can the news stories, and they don't have that relaxed.
Right. They're more externally thought provoking as opposed to internal. Let me take
Yeah,
a walk and
yeah,
think
like
this through.
maybe that's the, yes, thank you.
Contemplative.
It's Yeah, it's kind of like, um, this is a piece for me to read and I will think about it. And I'm trying in a way to give folks that. We're doing a whole series called Deep Time with about 10 scholars in the sciences, in math, talking about the realities of our universe and really pushing our theologians to be honest about those realities. So, but that's also a personal thing. Oh, finally somebody thinks like I think, which we
Mhm.
love that experience. But I'm also trying to pull us out of spectrum just for me and spectrum as a thing that I support because it's going to impact 23 million people potentially who, because they're part of the world, you could impact the world a little bit more. So I want folks to still find what they need personally, but also realize that when they're supporting Spectrum, they're having a larger impact on other people as well.
I love that ambitious, and that's a great. It makes sense, and it fits in with that community and context theme that you've had from the start, and it's just being more outwardly focused because the world is in a situation where we can't all just hunker down and be like, "What do I think? How do I feel about this?" We do live and react with many others, and it's a global movement. So, um, I am excited to see what Spectrum does. If people who are listening wanna engage with the content, it's spectrummagazine.org, and there it's a jumping off point. You have podcasts, you have articles, they can get the journal. And I am looking forward to seeing what you all do. So thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming out and talking with us today.
Well, thanks for your leadership of ACP and thanks for talking with me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Associated Church Press podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Follow us on social media for updates, member stories, and more from the ACP community. Until next time, keep telling the stories at the intersection of faith and journalism.